Yeah, baby, power. That's what we like. But where does power come from? It comes from porting, expansion chamber, carburetor jetting, the head squish band to speed up the burn rate, ignition timing so that the burn time matches the need of the engine, and that varies with fuel, it varies with engine oil, it varies with the compression ratio of the engine, and with the squish band, the squish velocity. All those add up together to create the torque that is measured in a dyno. From that torque, we're able to calculate the horsepower. Horsepower is basically torque multiplied by the RPM divided by 5252. Here we have the research paper by Gordon Blair, and from that, here's the specs on the karting engine he used. The exhaust pipe. I want you to read right here. It says 4.72 seconds for the perforated and solid systems respectively. On karting engines that have one gear, one speed, they often put holes in the baffle cone and then enclosed it again, and that greatly diminished the return wave from the baffle. Here we see the horsepower curve. The fine line is with the perforated baffle, and the thicker line is with the regular baffle cone. You see it lowered the very height of the peak a little bit. It got rid of the pre-power band power dip due to the baffle, return baffle wave, but it gave a better power extension for overrev, which is what the karts really like. Here is reproduced the from that same paper, the delivery ratio. This is the measured amount from the engine, and this is what they had calculated. And this is the same graph of horsepower. I want you to look at something. Do you see that hump right there? And you see the horsepower hump right there? They're almost exactly the same. What happens? The delivery ratio is the increasing the percentage of intake charge in the cylinder versus the amount of spent gas that's still there. In this case, we've got a maximum of 92.5%. So let's say this is 92.5%. The higher that percentage, the stronger the push on the piston, the stronger, the more power there is. Okay? So the idea is that we're going to fill that up as much as possible, have as little as possible of spent gases remaining. This is showing as the piston's rising how there's so much spent gases there, and the transfer flow is pushing those spent gases out the exhaust. What happens though is as the RPM increases, the time that exists from when that transfer port is first opened to when the piston comes up to close the exhaust port becomes less and less. You can see here from 7.9 milliseconds to 5.5 milliseconds. But the transfer flow is still about the same speed each time because it's governed mostly by the opening of the transfer port and the pressure that's behind it, which is the crankcase pressure, which depends upon the crankcase compression ratio. So at lower RPM, you have more time for that transfer flow to go past that top edge of the exhaust port and lose some of it out the exhaust port. And at high RPM, there's less time available for that transfer flow to reach that point. The end result being is this pyramidal shape. It goes up to its highest point, which is where the flow is right at the top of the exhaust port when the piston closes it, and then down. So we've got loss of intake charge out the exhaust port, and then we've got a lack of pushing out the spent gases from the previous cycle, which is this right here. Even at best, you can see not all of it is transfer flow, which is why in the case of Blair's engine we have 92% maximum. So yeah, the transfer flow, the delivery ratio affects the torque and the horsepower. So the challenge of my program was to get that triangle shape to peak at the same RPM on the different engines that I tested. So this is my porting calculator. Sheet 1 is where you enter in the basic information. Sheet 2 is where you set the top RPM, the widths of the exhaust port every 1 millimeter down. If you want to also show you want to see the horsepower graph, you can also enter in the boost numbers from my pipe calculator. And then when you click calculate, it gives you this graph right here. And it's three things: the delivery ratio without the pipe boost, the delivery ratio with the pipe boost, and the horsepower, which is the result of that boosted delivery ratio. If you scroll down here, it shows you the delivery ratio, and it is actually peaking right at 10,750 RPM, which I will show you by lowering the peak RPM. So you can see the peak is right there, which is 10,750 RPM. Which on Blair's chart is 10,750 RPM. So that's the goal of any program, to get it to match measured reality. But this is a karting engine. It's got a really long power band, and so I'm going to minimize this right now and show you a more normal example. This is an engine from the Aprilia RS 125, and what you can see here is that it's peaking right at 10,500 RPM, which in combination with the pipe boost gives the same, almost the same peak. It actually peaks at 10,250. But what I want to point out here is that you want that peak to happen pretty close to the peak where you want the top horsepower to be. Because like I said, the delivery ratio affects the torque, which affects the horsepower. Let me show you now a chart from the KTM XS250. On this one you can see the peak of the delivery ratio is at 9,750. This is a modified KTM, and it revs really high. It revs too high. The pistons don't last very long in it. So we got a peak horsepower at 10,000 RPM. But again, the peak delivery ratio is within this zone, close to the middle of where they wanted the peak horsepower to be. Let me show you the other graphs down here. This is showing the flow of the transfer into the cylinder, and it shows you where it ends. This is bottom dead center, this is transfer closing, this is exhaust closing. This is showing the transfer and how far it reaches towards exhaust closing, the top of the exhaust port. And that is at 9,750, so I'm going to enter that RPM here to show you that that coincides. So we've got this in agreement with reality. I want to show you how this is in agreement with reality. This is Blair's research paper called The Unsteady Gas Exchange Characteristics of a Two-Cycle Engine. Here you can see at 8,000 RPM, the MK4 pipe that he tested on the Husky 250 ends its transfer, which is, you can see by the end of the crankcase pressure, at about 2/3 the distance between bottom dead center and transfer closing. This is that same engine entered into the porting calculator, and over here it allows you to record the RPM of the peak delivery ratio, the highest point, and the combustion-free transfer, which is this graph right here, at whatever RPM you want to make note of that at. Like in this case, the tarp RPM is 8,250 of this old Husky 250. These numbers right here are the percent of the transfer opening from the time the piston uncovers the transfer to bottom dead center, the percent of that time that is without the combustion pressure holding it back, because it has to go down all the way down to like somewhere between 5 and 7 psi for that transfer to be allowed to flow into the cylinder. So I really don't like to see any less than 0.8, which is 80%. This one goes all the way down to 70%, which I don't like. I think it's a bad design. And this right here is the compression ratio calculator. So if you know the compression ratio of the present setup, you know, it's like, let's say it's a stock bike and you know the specs on it, or you've measured, you've done the measurements using this calculator right here, and right here it tells you what the compression ratio is. Trapped means what's above the exhaust port. So you've got the compression ratio, the distance above the exhaust port to the TDC point, and then when you change that distance above the exhaust port, it tells you what the new compression ratio is. So that's new in this calculator. This right here shows you the distance above the exhaust port and the distance above the transfer port. And other than that, and the first page being separate where you enter in most of the data, it's pretty much the same as it was before. The biggest change now is that it does a really accurate simulation of the delivery ratio, which is the most important thing. The previous porting calculators were going off of the time area, also figuring in the loss of transfer opening due to that overlap of the combustion pressure. It's a much better design now. I have to mention about this section right here. This section is about the pipe boost. You can select no expansion chamber, just a header and a muffler, or a header diffuser muffler without a baffle cone, which some mopeds have, an expansion chamber with a diffuser and a baffle cone, but of a moderate design for street or trail, a racing expansion chamber, Or if you have my pipe calculator and you've done the work on it on sheet 3, row 300, you can copy those numbers and enter them in right here. And that tells the program how much to boost the delivery ratio to give this boosted delivery ratio, which is what the program uses to get the horsepower. It's not real critical if you don't have my pipe calculator. Just choose one of these. Only enter one cell with an X. Don't leave 2 of them. You see how the horsepower changed. And after you enter them, you can look over here to make sure it's a nice smooth transition. If like one of them are like way up here, maybe you entered 0.14 instead of 0.04, you know, some error. So this gives you a visual of what you just entered. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, please let me know.